the GOP failure. So give me overall your reaction to Gingrich.
Well, again, like Adrian, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Newt Gingrich is right. And when you consider the fact that for Joe Biden, and this is something that I think Democrats like Adrian and I have been frustrated with the press about, is he doesn't get the credit that he deserves for the historic accomplishments that he has presided over with one of the narrowest majorities in Congress that we have ever seen in United States history, and yet he's gotten historic investments in infrastructure, historic investments in climate change, historic investments in manufacturing.
Wait, whose fault is it that you're talking about a messaging issue? Why is that not getting out? Because we do talk about it in a granular way. The three of us have done so. I've done it with different guests. We talk about the accomplishments. Sure. Why is that message not getting out to your satisfaction?
Well, I think, honestly, this is where the mainstream Beltway media kind of gets caught in process. So much of the narrative for the better part of the year was what? Democrats in disarray. It was focusing on figures like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. It was about the Republican wave that never materialized. That took up so much oxygen. And then here we are at the end of the year looking back and going, wow, you know what? The year wasn't a disaster for Democrats. The Biden administration didn't underperform. In fact, they overperformed expectations. Republicans are in complete meltdown mode. I mean, listen, since the election, you would think after a historic underperforming like they had in 2012, and this is what I wrote about in the LA Times piece, the RNC commissioned an autopsy. They said they need to get more diverse. They need to reach out to different communities. They cannot just talk to one another in a circular echo chamber. And what have they done? They've doubled down on a strategy that failed them. They lost in 2012 very winnable races. They could have taken out Claire McCaskill. They failed. They elected lunatic people like Todd Aiken talking about legitimate rape. They failed. Right. 10 years later, they nominate people like Oz in Pennsylvania, disasters in Arizona, what we're about to see with Herschel Walker in Georgia, and they fail. So, and how did they respond, Alex? They try to figure out how to talk about white nationalism and Nazism.
Well, look, I mean, the op-ed title, it's a perfect summarization. It's Groundhog Day for the GOP. Failure after defeat is becoming a Republican hallmark. So, Adrian, let's move to you and ask you about the change that is pending by the DNC, moving Iowa entirely out of the early primary voting and elevating South Carolina to #1. This is the prompting of the president. And it all sort of plays into the strength of this president post midterms, right? I mean, he's got greater license now to decide who goes first.
Yeah, look, Alex, I think this is a really smart move by the DNC and by President Biden, because for the first time in a long time, Black voters and Latino voters are going to have a much bigger say in terms of determining who the nominee is in the Democratic Party, with, of course, South Carolina, Nevada, which was already up there, but keeping Nevada at the forefront, but also incorporating states like Michigan, which is a largely diverse state. It's a really smart move. And look, you know, Alex, we're never going to forget, of course, the disaster that was the Iowa caucuses in 2020. Part of this plan also largely gets rid of caucuses. I think there are going to be a few states that still caucus, but it's going to be a far more democratic, far more equitable way for Democrats to choose our nominee. I think it's incredibly smart. I think it's frankly overdue. You know, I'm not going to miss knocking on doors in Iowa in sub-degree temperatures. I think a lot of Democrats probably feel the same way. But I think this is something that was a priority of President Biden's, to make sure that more diversity was at the forefront of choosing our nominee. And now, once again, President Biden is putting his money where his mouth is and making really important, critical changes to our Democratic nominating process.
Yeah. Switching up a bit with you, Kurt, because I want to ask you about that DHS sounding the alarm about new domestic terror threats, this against migrant, LGBTQ, as well as Jewish communities. And when asked directly whether anti-Semitic remarks by Kanye West contributed to increased threats, a senior DHS official said any high-profile official or celebrity trafficking in conspiracy theories only serves to ignite violence among extremists. This is someone who had dinner days earlier with Donald Trump and known white supremacist Nick Fuentes. How do you interpret all this?
Well, we've been talking for a while now, ever since really Donald Trump came onto the stage and tried to mainstream really extreme rhetoric. I mean, this is someone who oftentimes targeted the press as the enemy of the American people and tweeted violent images depicting violence against the press. And as we've seen the rise of characters like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, like the Lauren Boeberts, like the Matt Gaetz, who try almost like they're these shock DJs where they put out content designed to incite their base and generate a conversation about really uncomfortable things, that has only continued to grow, in part because the downright refusal of the main leadership within the Republican Party to just outright condemn this stuff and say, knock it off. It just sends the signal that that type of conversation and dialogue is acceptable in the Republican Party. And I mean, again, I go back to something I said earlier, which is how difficult is it to condemn someone who says, I like Hitler, and Nazis get the raw end of the deal historically. How hard is it to say, yeah, you shouldn't dine with known white nationalists. You shouldn't speak at their conventions. And instead of condemning them, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who spoke at a Nick Fuentes produced event, Kevin McCarthy, the would-be leader of the Republican Party, is going to reward her by putting her on the oversight committee, by giving her more power, by pandering to that extreme group within his party rather than to set them straight, because the Republican Party is so terrified of their own base. They're stuck in this pattern of just saying nothing while it continues to grow and expand.